Thank you for joining us for another Climate Justice Working Group meeting. For folks who are on the phone and for Climate Justice Working Group members, we have one more meeting scheduled this month, February 23rd, which is next Thursday at 12 p.m. If we do need an additional meeting in March, I will send a poll around for dates for that meeting before the end of this week, just in case we don't vote on the criteria or decide to not vote on the criteria next week. Next slide, please. Just to go quickly with meeting procedures for those who are participating or listening as attendees. Just a quick note, this is a meeting of the Climate Justice Working Group. This is not a public hearing or a public forum, so we won't be taking any testimony or questions from the public during this meeting. If you have any questions or comments on these proceedings, please send them to our email address at climatejustice, all spelled out, wg@dec.ny.gov. For Climate Justice Working Group members, to reduce noise, rooms will sort of automatically be muted. Raise your hand and we'll unmute you. And lastly, since we're broadcasting via WebEx, if you can, state your name before speaking, just for the purposes of the transcript. Next slide, please. And with that said, I will do the roll call. I'm going to start here in Albany at NYSERDA in the Plattsburgh room. We have myself, Alana Cadell-Tucky.
And this is Neil Muscatello from DOH. And Chris Cole from NYSERDA.
Thanks, everyone. Let's go to our New York City office. New York City.
Hi, Elizabeth from Labor. Emily Stein from New York City DOT. Oh.
Okay. Is that everyone in, are those all the working group members in New York City?
Affirmative, yes. The only working group member is in the present physically is Elizabeth.
Thanks. All right, let's go to Region 5. Jill.
Region 5, I'm going to unmute you. Oh, are you there?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
Jill, if you could just say your name and.
Jill Hank, Adirondack North Country Association.
Thank you. And we're going to go to our Region 8 office in Avon with Abby.
Hi, everybody. Abby McHugh, Gruffudd Climate Solutions Accelerator.
Thank you. And now we're going to go to Region 9 to see if anyone is in our Region 9 office.
Hi, Alana. Rawa's not here yet. We do have a couple DEC staff here, but Rawa's not here yet. I hear she may be on her way.
Yes. Okay. All right. So we do not have a quorum present in physical locations, so we will not be able to deliberate until we get at least one more Climate Justice Working Group member in a physical location. But I can still just count the other Climate Justice Working Group members who are on the phone and recognize that they're here. We have Eddie Bautista.
Hi, oh, yes.
And Elizabeth Yampier.
Present.
So we'll just get started with the presentation, and when folks are present, and just avoid any direct deliberations and decision making. And when folks are present, we know that Rawa is on her way. I believe Sonal is also on her way. We can get started once they are present. All right, next slide. So the agenda is pretty simple. Since we are kind of speeding towards the end of this process, I use that more as a euphemism than what we're actually doing. We've been very kind of deliberate in our actions. And so since we are coming towards the end, we've done the roll call, and now we are going to be going through the methodological review. Look at the timeline one more time. Up, is that Sonal? Hi, Sonal. All right,
Hi,
Sonal
I'm
is
here.
here. We are free to deliberate. So just to see the agenda, roll call, methodological review, timeline and next steps. I know we haven't voted on the minutes in a little bit. Unfortunately, Sarah and Bernard will be out of the office for some time. So we will look to get the minutes for folks to vote on during our meeting on the 23rd. Apologies in advance for any inconveniences. Sarah does send her well wishes to everyone. Next slide. And we will jump right to Alex and get started with discussing the methodology. Alex.
Okay, sounds good. I am going to share my screen. And Alana, I'll ask for you to kind of monitor, any questions that I can't see or hands raised since I can't see them. And I'm going to share this whole screen. Okay. Before I dive into that, here is where we're going to start. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. So last week we chatted about 3 kind of major components from the comments that really we wanted to discuss in more detail. And we talked through the 35% versus 30% as far as the proportion of census tracts that we would designate a DAC. And I think we all made a decision at that point. You all made a decision at that point to stick with 35%. That when you you go down to 30, you're really losing some critical spots. So that I think is been reviewed, and now we've worked through and talked through some of the other 2 main areas, which is the multiply versus add component scores, and I'll review again what that means in a second. And then also trying to weight factors that or indicators that really are indicative of resiliency and representation of Black and Latino groups. And so in those 2, we spoke and looked at a little bit of it, but it's like scratching the surface. And you all wanted to see some specific statistics for those different scenarios. So I've got those all ready for you. I've also set up a heck of a Tableau sheet where we can tinker with just about anything at this point, and you all can explore different options as far as weighting. So I'm going to dive in. Again, please speak up if you have questions. First thing we're going to do is kind of go over again the idea of multiplying versus adding component scores. And here's the reasoning for it. I added the labels here to make it a little clearer which one's which. Right now, we're in the draft criteria that is currently there, we're multiplying the 2 component scores. The 2 component scores, again, just to remind you, are additions of the different factors within them. So for the environmental burdens one, we've got pollution, exposure, land use, and potential climate change risks. And then for the population characteristics and health vulnerabilities component score, we've got income, education, employment, race, ethnicity, and language, health impacts and sensitivities, and housing and energy communications. We add the scores up within the component score, and then we have 1 score. And the theory that I think it really makes a lot of sense, is that if you have a high environmental burden and a high population characteristics and health vulnerabilities, that they basically exacerbate one another, right? So multiplying can help to exaggerate that and show that, wow, they're really going to play off each other, and you're really, really more disadvantaged than in another way if you add them. But what this doesn't do is let us say, hey, we think population characteristics actually matter more than environmental burdens. If, say, I want to give this a weight of 2, like make this box physically bigger, and then I multiply it, because of the way multiplication works, it just is going to multiply everything. Like say it's going to double everything in the score. And so that means multiplication, while theoretically could make a lot of sense, may not let us do some of the things mathematically that you want to do. It's not to say it's not wrong, and I actually think, you guys could maybe choose to stay with multiplication, but I wanted to get you the idea here that the only way that we can try to weight, say, the population characteristics and health vulnerabilities more is to change from multiplication to addition. Then we can make this matter more. We add the two component scores together, and this will matter more, this population characteristics. Any questions so far?
Alex, I just have one. When you mentioned in the slide that the multiplication aligns with what others have done, could you share a little intel, like what others do you mean, and what was the thinking, if you can share that?
Yeah, California definitely was the one that kind of led the thing, and I think Justice 40 has also ended up multiplying different component scores, but I'll have to look into that. California definitely does. What they have done is create basically the same kind of 2 giant buckets of these components, and with the kind of theory that they had, which is, if you have a high score population characteristic, or if you're highly vulnerable and you have high environmental burdens, then by multiplying something, you're exaggerating it, right? You're making it much bigger number than you would if you just added those 2 scores together. And so California has done that, and I mean, there's really not a lot of precedent because it's not like a lot of different regions have done this, but they're the ones that started that thinking, and it really came from a kind of environmental justice perspective of things exacerbating one another to a point where they, if you have high in both, then it's going to really, really matter. Does that help, Eddie?
Yeah, no, thank you. So I just want to make sure I understood the last part. So they made a conscious choice to multiply because, could you just say, you faded out there for a second? I'm so sorry. What was
Yeah.
the rationale for multiplying?
The rationale was that they felt like if you had they wanted to ensure that people with high environmental burdens and high vulnerabilities, both of them, could basically create a larger number because they thought they were way more at risk versus, say, a lower score on one, you would be at less of a risk, right? And I don't feel like I'm explaining this really well, but I think what I'll do, and bear with me here, is to say if you have a score of, say, the average 34, and let's make this a burden, and this is a vulnerability score, if I can spell right, 67. I think those are kind of the averages across the designated a DAC one. And say if you have 17 but 90 here, and then you had 18, and let's go with 78 here, or 78 and 24. So I'm just going to go over here and say, okay, this is adding them and this is multiplying them. And now you're going to, like, what it does is, let me show you here the difference in the addition between, say, a 17 and a 90. They're highly vulnerable, but they have a lot less burden. You add it and you're at 107. But here, because you're not multiplying them, or because you're multiplying them, the two together, you actually get a lower number than you would if you had, say, a slightly lower vulnerability, but you're still higher in the burden. And in fact, this score for burden is really pretty high.
Hey, Alex, can you just zoom in a little bit, please?
Oh, yeah. Did I do the whole thing where it's like tiny? Apologies.
Super tiny.
Super tiny. I have a giant screen, so okay. So it helps to actually visualize this because there's a lot less variability here than there is in this. We can rank order them and we'll choose them, and so it's not as huge of a thing because of the way that we end up finding the top 25%. But you can start seeing that the difference here is this. If you added this score and this score together, you'd get 107. So it's actually our highest. If you added here, which a pretty darn high burden actually, 34 is the kind of the threshold for those that are considered DACs with burden scores in our thing, and 67 is around what vulnerability is, you would score lower. If you multiply them, you'd actually score higher. And so this is kind of the idea that you have relatively high burden and pretty darn high vulnerability, you're really more at risk than, say, if you don't have the environmental burdens, but you're very vulnerable. I would also say this, that part of the reason why sometimes our ground truthing doesn't feel like it shows with the multiplication is because we see the vulnerabilities and almost all of the descriptions, you know, like a year and a half ago when you did the ground truthing, they all were sociodemographic factors that you were describing within the disadvantaged communities. I would say the environmental burdens are often more invisible. They correlate, but they're more invisible, and so people don't describe them. So it's a choice. Eddie, I saw something pop up as a comment, but I can never actually read them because they disappear.
Oh, sorry.
Anything you want to say?
Yeah. I actually, it's two questions. One is, let me ask the one I didn't type in first, which is, and by adding the scores, what is the policy distinction or benefit by that choice? And I guess the question I typed is related, which is, if Cali, Washington, and possibly Justice 40 are all multiplying scores, would New York be the first jurisdiction to add rather than multiply? And so those are my two questions. Thanks.
Well, I know California is definitely multiplying, and I think Washington is, but I'm not sure. And again, Justice 40, I need to check. But Tyler or Shannon, please add something in the comments if you remember better than me. So there's the policy-wise, which I think we should all talk about. On one, I think, okay, so Washington State definitely multiplies. That's good. Okay, so one component I think that's worth talking through here is, again, there's this level of subjectivity to what, just because others have done it with precedent here, doesn't mean that it's right or wrong. We have to choose what's best and what we see. And I'll tell you this. So now I'm going to go to a place where I'm saying, okay, scenario 2 is identical to scenario 1, but now the only difference I've done is actually make it so that the final scores are added. And you will find that it actually doesn't change a huge amount. Because of the way that we have balanced the scores. It's not like we're taking the end scores, we're taking the top 25 percentile, or the top percentile that we deem we want to designate. And because of that, it's not quite as different. Okay, we've all seen this map at this point, but I want to say it again. The red is the thing, are the census tracts that would be designated irrespective of the scenario. The yellow are the ones that would be designated only in the traditional scenario that you have seen and voted on for the draft criteria. The blue would be the ones that would supplant the yellow, so they're the only ones that would be designated in the addition scenario. So I like to think of this as, if you're considering the second scenario, you'd be losing the yellow and gaining the blue. And it's, I think, interesting in that again, it's not necessarily that we know right or wrong here. What it is that there are some around the margins that when you add, right here, we're in Queens. If you add, this one would be there. It would be added. Sorry, I got distracted by comments disappearing. If you multiplied, you would lose, you would keep this one, but if you added, you would lose it. And it really is a judgment call to you. The only reason I'm even going through the frankly linguistic ridiculousness of trying to explain like how the difference with adding census tracts. Anyway, it's hard to talk through. Is that by adding, it allows us to weight component scores or weight factors and have a little bit more kind of changes that we can make. But Eddie, you said it best last time. In all of my preparation for this week, it felt like everything is just around the edges, right? We're talking about so much similarity across these different groups that it's hard to even really be able to gauge what, you know, what the differences are.
So, Alex, and I'm sorry, I wouldn't be this specific if we weren't nearing the end of this process. So, if folks could forgive me, if it's possible, would be helpful to me would be if we could zoom in on a particular part of Queens that I've heard from more than one advocate that they don't understand why Southeast Queens would not end up appearing as a DAC. Again, it's a community that has some environmental burdens. So it's got some manufacturing mixed use zones. It also has, as far as infrastructure, a really poor connection to the city sewer system. I won't go into details about why this goes on. This goes back decades, but suffice to say that there are constant flooding problems in Southeast Queens that frankly is going to cost billions of dollars for the city to finally fix. But it stands to, one would think that those communities would appear as a DAC, and what I'm hearing from folks is that they don't. And I don't know if the multiplication or addition helps. It probably doesn't if it's at the margins, like we've been saying. But are you able to zoom in on South? And I wish I had the
Yeah.
exact numbers, census tract numbers. I don't, but maybe someone else on from DEC or NYSERDA could help you
Yeah,
zoom in on Southeast Queens. Yeah.
we can find that, definitely. So what I'm doing right now, though, is I noticed that one of the things that we always have to adjust for is when I make a change, we end up wanting to make sure that everything is still at a 35% at the end here. So it's like this really silly math problem trying to come up with the right number. So let me do that, and then yes, we can absolutely do it. But this will let us have a more apples to apples comparison. And so now I'm gonna just take this and do, I think 7. Let's see if that works. Or did I go the wrong way? There we go. Okay, 7 here. And then, yeah, we can dig around Queens, and I think that it's worthwhile looking through it. I also, I searched around for anything that I could, to make it, to give you as much of the examples that I could here. And one of the things I wanted to show you is that you have these different breakdowns, but I also have, for the different scenarios, the average scores or the average percentages for census tracts that are in DAX for scenario 1 and scenario 2. So we can look at that as well. Okay, we're at 35 and 35. So now it's an apples to apples comparison with the addition. And now we'll go see Queens. I do think it's actually really important for us to look at this from not just these larger statistics, which end up being not nearly as informative because, again, they're regressing to the mean. You've got, say, for scenario 2, a 2% increase with Black African American, 1 for Latino, same Asian, The burden scores are nearly identical, 37 and 63 versus 38 and 62. So you're not seeing a lot of change across these different ones. Let's go to Queens. Okay, Queens is rather large when I look at it this way. So can someone help direct me to where you think it is?
Yeah, so like Southeast Queens, like folks from the agency should be able to identify. We're talking about like Jamaica, you know, Hollis, St. Albans, Springfield Gardens, like that part of Queens. I don't have census tracts memorized, so I'm hoping that maybe our state friends could help us.
Yeah.
Hey, Alex, it's Chris. If you try census tract 998.01,
Wait, can you say that again? I couldn't hear that last little bit.
998.01.
Okay.
You type it in.
998. Oh wait, no. 0.01.
Yeah.
I'm not sure they're going to give us that, but let's see.
Just search.
Yeah. Can you do search by neighborhood?
Try it. Yeah, I can't
Like a
remember.
specific location? I know that Snake Road is definitely an area that floods during every major storm event.
Okay. What was that again, Alana? What was the name of the road?
It was Snake Road.
Snake Road.
I don't know if it's going to show up.
Is there a way to kind of just move the map to the general area of Southeast Queens? Because what I've heard from different advocates is that nothing in Southeast Queens is showing up, which doesn't sound correct to me.
Okay, so I'm assuming it's going to be around here.
Yeah, just go a little bit more to the east, Alex,
Okay, so I'm going to go this way and then move
until you kind of see the water at the bottom,
until I see the
like,
water at the bottom.
south direction, if I know.
Like here?
Yeah, over there.
Okay. Well, now we're in Long Island. Okay, so here, I think it's
It's kind
probably
of on the
this area.
border. It's like the kind of the border of Queens and Long Island, but our state family, can you guys just indicate to Alex when she's hovering over what's more or less Southeast Queens?
I feel like this is it.
So if that section is Southeast Queens, and I don't know, I don't know if DEC, if you guys have been hearing this as well, but when I hear people tell me that none of Southeast Queens is covered, that's clearly not true because
Right, there
I'm
are
seeing
some-
it here.
There are some areas that are covered. I think the areas that have the higher levels of flooding. Yep. Yeah, we're in the right spot. Yeah, it's the areas I think that are most prone to flooding. I think that was the major concern, that those areas weren't covered. While there were some census tracts within Southeast Queens that were covered, there were some very highly flood vulnerable areas that they felt were not covered. Like I said, Snake Road in particular.
So can we apply that exercise here to see what the multiplication and addition does here? Because again, like if we've got an entire, you know, multiple neighborhoods in Queens that, you know, fit a lot of the demographic and other criteria, and in fact, the flooding is and I know DEC, I know you guys have been hearing about this for years. It's just it's counterintuitive at its most basic that this community would not end up as a DAC with our formula. So that's where I'm hoping that maybe the addition versus multiplication might give us a better sense. But if it's still marginal, it's still marginal. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's not in the sense. So here you can see the yellow. These would be lost if we added together. And the blue ones here would be added if we added. That's why it's hard to talk about. And so you would see in this area of Southeast Queens around this I found the Jamaica neighborhood, that there are ones that would be included here. But there already are a bunch that are included. So you would lose around the airports, which I think is interesting, given that there's been a lot of talk about wanting to make sure that the surrounding areas of airports are kind of included. There's definitely some that no matter what will be, but you would lose this one right here. But you would gain in this neighborhood quite a few census tracts if you added.
So that's, yeah, no, and I'm really glad to hear this. And I think this is going to be the ongoing problem moving forward, whatever methodology we choose and wherever we land. You're going to, DEC, you got, because I know I'm getting it. Like DEC, you're going to get people from deserving communities that are right next door to communities that are clearly DACs. And explanations are going to have to be given to folks as to why across the street is a DAC and they are not. And I don't have an answer to this. Like I really don't know. And I mean, it feels to me like addition would work here, but but there will be other people, other neighborhood leaders in Southeast Queens that'll get pissed that their airport adjacent community is now taken out of this. So like I at this point, like just as a New York City EJ activist, I feel like I'm gonna hear crap from somebody on one side of the street or the other. Which of course, that's what I guess we signed up for with this. But I just don't know if DC, if you guys have started getting these kinds of calls and whether folks have any thoughts about how to respond, because we are at the 11th hour with this, and this clearly would have an impact here, but it would still leave some people in that community upset. And who knows what the addition versus multiplication would look like for some of the other folks on this call, right, representing Upper Manhattan, Sunset Park. Yeah, so I'm let me shut up. Sorry.
Thanks, Eddie.
Could you
Yeah.
highlight the yellow region that's near the airport, just so we can see who's there? Because I thought maybe if it was just like, a very small less dense, but it says 4,700 residents. I mean, sorry, it's a little hard to read.
I know. I can't figure out how to zoom it.
Yeah, sorry. I'm looking at I'm trying. But how many folks would be not as necessarily a DAC, but as that additional like the low income folks?
Yeah, so that's what's hard to gauge. So I think in New York State, or sorry, not New York State, in New York City, you're increasing it by, let's see, 12% of New York City would then be eligible over and above the geographic tax. So that means that 60% of New York City residents, in essence, are going to be eligible for this.
So, right, and the income, we can't really see here how many of those folks would be. That's what I'm trying to look at.
Yeah, it's hard, although you can see, so you can kind of look at the 45% of the census tract are less than 80% AMI. Now, it's not perfect because it's not the method we're going to look at, and you've got less than 100% FPL, that's 13%. If in that range, so you've hitting about maybe 30% that are probably income eligible in this track. That is a wild guess, just looking between those two.
Okay, thanks. And then
Alex, this is Sonal. I also had a comment from New York City. I just wonder, like, Queens is something to what Eddie's saying. We have been getting a lot of comments around Queens too. And it was something I think we all were watching when we were first developing the draft criteria. And I'm just, we're trying, in my mind, I'm trying to troubleshoot, because I do agree that there is a lot missing that I would inherently look at the map and think they should be DACs. And I mean, the main thing I'm wondering about is, we know in a lot of parts of Queens, we have huge populations of undocumented folks from a lot of places around the world. And is that what's coming up as the barrier here to having inclusion based on a census tract criteria. And if that could be one of the explanations for what's going on here, I mean, is there a way to solve for that?
With the data we currently have, I don't know if there is over and above, at least pre-2020, the work that Census did was trying to actually get data from undocumented groups, like to take the fear of them responding so that they could be included in these type of data. It's imperfect, and it is, I think, one of those areas where part of the reason why I want us to look into, based on the comments again, houseless, there are a couple indicators that in the next year we're going to try to look for and see. Right now we don't see whether there's much there. The COVID data might actually get us some information here too. Right now there's not a lot that we can do if you try to do this, using the data we have.
So
Yeah, I
hi,
would
this is
add-
Alana.
Yeah.
Yep, I just wanted to point out that we have had conversations with folks and legislators and representatives on this issue. We did discuss that it is based on the data that we have, and there are opportunities in future reviews of the disadvantaged communities criteria to look at different data sets that as they become available, update data sets as they become available, to see what we can do to capture more communities. Obviously, as discussed previously, and we all know, we started off with a smaller number of criteria, so we can add additional criteria as this moves on rather than subtracting. So the goal is to hopefully be able to review criteria and review data sets in a way that does increase and eventually captures all communities that should be labeled as disadvantaged. In the meantime, for folks who are concerned that their community is not captured in the disadvantaged communities criteria, that does not mean that there are no sources or no resources and no funding that is available to assist with specific issues. We are examining ways to make sure that we are funding communities that are not considered to be disadvantaged communities, but are still technically located in potential environmental justice areas. We still have funding available to assist with those communities. We still have the Environmental Bond Act that has funding available. And as we all know, this the goal is for there to be 40% of the funding for renewable energy and energy efficiency that's steered towards these communities, that still leaves the other 60% of this funding available. So we are still working on how we're going to work with these funding streams, but people will not be without resources. We still will make resources available to these communities until we can find a mechanism that does get them considered to be disadvantaged communities based on the data sets and methodology that we're using.
I think this is also one of those areas where, as we know how things are performing, we can start making changes to see, oh, we're clearly not hitting the right areas, or this census tract just carved out this way isn't working, and we can make adjustments that way. So for Southwest Queens or Southeast Queens, it looks like there is some evidence to say that adding would add more census tracts, but it does look like in other parts of Queens, it does take away then from that region. And again, it's a judgment call. But yeah, Eddie?
Sorry, quick question. Who was it that spoke just before you that talked about, that broke down the different ways that the state can help communities? Was that you, Alana?
That was me, Eddie.
Awesome, great, thank you. That was, first of all, just thank you for saying that. And secondly, I just want to make a pitch that if you guys haven't done so already, it might be helpful to have that kind of, I don't want to say disclaimer, but that kind of like explanatory text on a website so folks could stop panicking already, because I'm literally getting those kind of it's more than once. But what I wanted to ask Alana, and maybe this actually is a question for the larger group. A lot of the, I don't want to say all, but a lot of the Southeast Queens flooding problems has to do with a major, infrastructure investment that's more regional, right? It's not It's not the kind of investment, or maybe it is, but I guess what I'm wondering, if folks could, who remember the law better than I do, what happens in a situation like a Southeast Queens where you have an enormous infrastructure problem that runs into the hundreds of millions, if not more, that I think has been on the drawing board, or at least has been talked about in government to relieve those conditions for years now. How does that funding work under the CLCPA? Like that kind of funding, if it's a big piece of regional infrastructure that would address multiple DACs, say, that is not the kind of funding, or is it the kind of funding that is contemplated by the 35 to 40%? Like there's capital funds that this kind of. So I'm just wondering
Right.
if NYSERDA or DC, if you guys could like share a little bit, like folks from Southeast Queens, if somehow their exact neighborhood is not a DAC, but if their real problem and worry is flooding, if that funding is coming, as you were just highlighting, and thanks again for that, Alana, that there are other ways to skin this cat. That's not the best environmental, you know what I'm saying? Like there are more ways of addressing this problem. Is there a way to tell people, look, even though the DAC stuff, and you're right, 40 versus 60, we still have 60%, so most of the money is still like out there, but it wasn't even this pot of money, I think, that the CLCPA talked about or envisioned when we talked about big infrastructure projects. So if someone could just talk a little bit about, that folks that have those kind of challenges should not worry if they're not in a DAC, because that comes out of a different pot of money, different sensibility. Or maybe I'm wrong. But anyway, if folks could speak to that, I'd really appreciate it.
Just something to say, because if not, I'll go. Okay, so yeah, I think you're right, Eddie. The CLCPA didn't really contemplate these large infrastructure projects that fall sort of, and I would say, outside of what they consider to be climate, energy efficiency and clean energy projects. That doesn't mean that there aren't funding streams available for those projects. We do have them, and we do have some precedent for using, and my brain is completely blanking on the fund that we specifically use for water infrastructure funding for municipalities or for areas that are experiencing wastewater treatment or extreme flooding issues. But I will remember it at some point. But with regards to that, there are, again, the Environmental Bond Act does have a section, and I do not have that right in front of me, that does cover water infrastructure. And we do have funding sources available, even through the DEC, that can help cover water, these larger scale water infrastructure projects. So we can definitely make sure that we're putting something on the website and making sure that we're steering folks towards these resources. I think that that's probably part of the problem, and not to say DEC's at fault, but that might be part of the problem, is that not enough folks know that these resources are available. So we can definitely make sure that we're doing a better job of identifying them and making it very clear that there are resources available to assist with those very specific, very, expensive infrastructure issues. Abby, you had your hand up?
Yeah, thank you, Alana. So in looking at the map and in looking at the chart that was next to the map with all the different numbers, it does strike me that although, it's a small difference, it looks to me like the addition approach is doing a better job of capturing what we've kind of been getting at for these last several weeks and what some of the concerns are. I do not know this area of Queens, but there's clearly more blue that has been added than the yellow, or the kind of what would be taken away. So I would be curious to look at other areas of the state, specifically, of course, the Rochester area. But at this point, it does seem like to me that there is a slight advantage to the addition approach.
Yeah, the other thing I'll point out, and I think the addition approach does this more. So you lose a percentage, so you're losing, and here are the numbers of DACs that are designated depending on the scenario. In New York City, for the original scenario, it's 966. In the scenario 2, there's 958, so there's slightly fewer. You do see some increases though in Southern Tier, Mohawk Valley, not North Country, sorry. but a little bit on Long Island. And these are small and they're around the edges, but they're there. And I want to insert also, not to add a layer of complexity, but the only reason we're really even talking about addition versus multiplication is to give you more of a chance to say, weight things that you think are going to be really important. Like if you think health is more important or you think climate is less important, then we can actually weight those and it will have a bigger effect. So this is going to do it as soon as I try to click in here. It should. Okay, there we go. And then Abby, once I get this kind of set up back to normal, then we can and see now that those climate indicators seem to be actually really important for this part of Queens. So you would actually end up losing a lot more this way if you reduce climate to a 1. These are, again, you know, I think Eddie said it best last time. We're playing at the edges of things, right? There's a lot more red than anything else. And also, I think, Eddie, you said it, like, no one is going to be perfectly happy with this because there are places that are missed versus not. So it's imperfect.
Plus, we're New Yorkers too, yeah.
I also I dug this up because this was like the thing that we voted on before, and it's kind of a good refresh of saying, you know, what you were talking about, Eddie, with the infrastructure is not something that actually would even be counted for this legislation at all anyway, because they're not energy or energy efficiency programs. So the idea here is all meant to be something about addressing climate and energy. And I'm not a lawyer, so you guys can all interpret it the way you want. But to me, I thought that was interesting too. So if there is a fundamental infrastructure issue here, I'm not even sure that being a DAC would help or not.
True, although I think, I mean, for example, if and this is like one of those neighborhoods that's, you know, a lot of homeowners, right? It's a homeowner community, a lot of small 1-2 family homes, where they would maybe make the argument in reverse is like, well, look, if we want to qualify for energy efficiency, you know, heat pumps and stuff like that, it helps if we're in a DAC. So that's where it starts becoming rubber hits the road kind of. Unless I'm mistaken, DEC and NYSERDA, I think that's where especially with homeowners, that's the kind of lens that they may be looking at this through.
I would say we're definitely, you know, the disadvantaged communities criteria is going to help, and it is going to be, you know, we're all working together to create that benefits investments framework. But, you know, we're not going to be, the goal is to get as many as possible. And so we will be looking to how we can steer funding or how certain agencies are already steering funding outside of, you know, what are disadvantaged communities. And as I think I've stated before, while we are using the disadvantaged communities criteria, we are still also using the potential environmental justice areas as criteria for funding as well. So we're not getting rid of those, because when we did look at this, we noticed that there was not a complete overlay. So there are areas that are identified as potential environmental justice areas under our EJ definition that are not considered to be disadvantaged communities. And we want to make sure that those areas still continue to have resources and funding within our state agency programs.
Wow, that's great. It's a great distinction, because that's something that even allies in law offices were confused and to forget our lawyer friends. I myself thought at some point that the DAC designation would ultimately replace the potential EJ communities. So if that's not the case, it would also be really helpful to let folks know, hey, look, you know, if you're today a potential EJ designated community, but you're not a DAC, no worry not, because the potential EJ community designation will still apply to you, and whatever benefits accrue from that designation are still in effect. So I think that if I just captured what you said correctly, that's not a little thing. That's going to be, I think, a big difference to a lot of folks in the state. So thanks for sharing that.
Absolutely. I would never say worry not. I'm a worrier. So, I'm a worry always kind of person. But yes, it was very important that we made sure that, we weren't leaving anyone out and, and looking at that we weren't replacing that definition because it's very critical to folks who have been identified as potential environmental justice communities who have been getting resources through our environmental justice grants, that those communities continue to receive that assistance and continue to receive those considerations from our permitting process. So, yeah, it was definitely something that we noticed and quickly, changed course because I think we recognized that there did seem to be that the disadvantaged communities criteria, the disadvantaged communities definition would replace potential environmental justice areas, and it just didn't work for what we were doing. So, like I said, don't say worry not, but remember that there are still resources for potential environmental justice areas that fall outside of disadvantaged communities. And if you have questions about that, if anybody who's listening has questions, for folks, who are here have questions, feel free to reach out to the Office of Environmental Justice, and we can definitely talk about that.
I think all of it.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, Abby, go.
Well, so thank you for zooming in on Rochester here. Seeing this map, I now have very clear and strong feelings about which approach is the better approach. The blue, that aligns with the ground truthing that was done. That captures the communities that were left out that clearly shouldn't have been left out. I mean, to me, it is all like game over. To me. And I think it might be easier with a community like Rochester, which, our tracks are a little bigger and all that, to kind of to see it in this form. And I just, what is on my mind right now, in the last 2 days, 2 people have brought up to me what happened in Buffalo and how that could have been Rochester. And how if it had been Rochester, I mean, who would have died? And it's those people who are living in the blue census tracts that were left out previously. So I vote for the blue.
Yeah. Thank you, Abby. I was actually going to go to Buffalo next, and I wanted us to take a look there and see whether the communities that were impacted most strongly there were included. That could help us. Let me go there. I can't see anyone's faces, by the way, or comments, so it's not easy right now to not see you guys.
I'm going to quickly point out because it was pointed out the barriers, it's in the comments that the barriers and opportunities report also requires priority consideration for climate hazard protections in disadvantaged communities. So that's just something also for folks to consider.
And Abby, you're right. I mean, if you look at the vulnerability percentiles here, they would be left out because they don't have as many environmental burdens. But the vulnerabilities are very, very high for these blue ones. And that really shifts over here where you see the environmental burdens really hitting high. The vulnerabilities are much lower. Okay, let's go to Buffalo. Rawa, you here?
Yes, I am.
Been thinking about you a lot
Oh,
last few days.
we appreciate it. Thank you. It's been rough.
Yeah. So this is what Buffalo would look like. Mostly red, but additions here would be kind of around the edges and you would lose a couple outline areas.
Can you just go over a little bit of where the blues are? They look right to me, by the way, except I feel terrible. I can't speak for I would I would like to also know what the yellow ones are, but if we can start with the blue.
Yeah, so this one is like an island of wouldn't be designated a DAC in the original scenario. So in this case, median income is 29,000, 75% less than 80% AMI, 26% less than 100% FPL, 84% African American, So their vulnerability percentile is 88%. Their burden percentile is 7.
Interesting. Can you zoom in on where that is?
Yeah.
I'm trying to see what the streets are.
Yeah. So here we've got William Street. Broadway's up here.
Yeah.
And then this looks like Clinton Street down below.
I am very miffed by why the 7% is showing up that way, because it's an area that has received very little investment, and really old housing stock that needs there's just a lot of issues there. It's definitely a climate justice community. Okay.
Mhm.
I like that addition. It definitely fits.
Okay, let me move us to another one here. So now we're kind of going in the Pine Hill regions. This is Pine Hill, Pine Ridge, Heritage Road. This one's actually more kind of balanced between burden and vulnerability percentile. 34th percentile for burden, 64th for vulnerability, 45,000 income, 53% less than 80% AMI.
Okay.
And then down here, high vulnerable percentile, but very low burden.
Got it. Yep.
So one of the things I think you all notice is, and Abby said this, like the blues align, I think, more with our visual recognition and also statistically clearly of what we deem a disadvantaged community. And I think that's because vulnerabilities are much more visually present. They're the things we think about often. But I also want to say that burdens can be invisible sometimes, or, and so we don't think of them as much as disadvantaged, but they clearly are. And it's kind of like, I don't know, if we had our druthers, I would love to just like combine the yellow and the blue and the red and just make it one big happy family. But that would add a lot of, several percentages, and that's too much.
And I'm wondering if the yellow in Depew is because the airport's near there.
I think that's probably right.
Mhm.
So it's got a burden percentile of 83%, and the vulnerability again now is 32. Eco is still a large proportion, 44% less than 80% AMI.
Yeah. And then is it possible for me? Yeah, what's that one?
So this is, let's see, yeah, West Seneca. And again, burden percentile 76%, vulnerability is 37.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with these, and I agree with you. I wish we could just combine them all, just because the differences are, it's hard to compare apples to oranges. Would it be possible for me to see where Niagara Falls falls in this whole thing?
Yeah, let me get up there. So it looks like with this, you'd be losing one that has a high burden percentile.
Okay. At least, I mean, that's about right. I mean, I think all of Niagara Falls is a DAC.
With the exception of this one.
Yeah, I imagine that's where like where the tourism happens.
Ah, okay. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. Anywhere else you all would like me to go?
I think I'm good. I mean, that pretty much represents Buffalo and the way I imagined it would all play out.
Okay.
It's Alana.
Can we,
I just kind of
go
wanted to
back
get
to
a look at
Brooklyn?
the southern tier.
Wait, okay, let's do southern tier real quick.
Yeah, I was just thinking southern tier and the mid-Hudson region. Just wanted to get a look at what those look like.
Yeah, let's look at Mid-Hudson region. I think this is probably one of the places where it has some of the larger changes. And a lot of this is because the riverine flooding coming for within the burden component score is less, right? So you're seeing some reductions here Am I in the right place, Alana?
Sorry, I was muted. Yes.
Okay. So here, you know, you kind of see the other, that we'd lose this if we did addition. But you would gain some of these other smaller ones here. And this is, oh wait, right here. So this has a lower burden, but a very high vulnerability percentile. I think whatever you all choose, we should test the effectiveness of this, you know, in the coming years, right? So this is we're going to constantly be monitoring this and seeing whether it's really working the way we think it should. And, you know, refresh the data, you know, when we do and show you what's going on. But I think that type of review and then assessment also of the effectiveness of this is going to give us a lot more information, because these are, I think, going to be pretty important for us to look through when we get more data. Okay, Sunset Park coming up. So Sunset Park, you would lose this one, which has a high burden and pretty high vulnerability. You would gain two other areas, two other census tracts here. This one has a much higher vulnerability and lower burden. And then same thing here. And one thing that stuck with me, Elizabeth, when we were talking about this before the vote last year, was that there are a lot of undocumented workers in sweatshops around this area. And we managed to capture a bunch, but not all of them. Do you feel like this addition or these subtractions, whether that fits better?
So it's a little
Maybe.
challenging because the first blue box, the one that's closest to the pink area, is a vulnerable community. But then the yellow box includes, it does include a lot of the sweatshops and a lot of more of the Asian community that I feel has really been excluded from a lot of this. So it is really concerning. And then, but the blue boxes include a lot of working class, low income people with high levels of health disparities. So it's, yeah, it is concerning. Can you tell me would you know the number of the population for each of these?
Yeah, so up here it's got it. So this one
I
is
can't see it.
the, oh yeah, no, it's totally understand that. So the population of 1,213 for this one. Now I'm going to hop over here. This one's 6,479.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm going to hop over to this one. This is 6,188.
So it's substantially more people.
Mm-hmm.
Families.
But there was one thing that this got me thinking about, and that's in the future, we have, again, a couple different indicators that we're hoping to get. And the COVID data might actually be able to, if people are having to work in sweatshops and can't not work, these might pop health-wise in future data that we get. You know, so that those are some areas that we may be able to get more information later and see. I mean, there's so much left to do.
Yeah, that's good to know.
Going for perfectly imperfect. This is another one that would be lost in Kings, for anyone who knows that region. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. Well, actually, no. Let me go back here and talk through. Is this the right one? Yes, this is. Okay, so the scenarios that we had talked about and the ones that you had asked me to prepare examples for, we've just been talking about the addition versus the other. I did a little tinkering to see whether addition and climate at one, but it actually looked wrong. And the multiplication and climate at one also didn't really quite, if we're not going for multiplication, then I think we should just go with addition. But I wanted to show you guys this as well. Can everyone see this okay? I can make it bigger. These are the different ones. So again, always this is the draft criteria on the far left. And then here's the comparison with our large statistics that we're typically saying and we're looking at. With regression to the mean, it's also really just hard, frankly, to be able to say that there's much change here. The devil, I think, is in the details. And that's the part where we need to think about, is this census tract really more of a DAC than another, when we all, I think, agree that they're on certain gradations, both deserving of being a DAC. So now I'm going to stop talking, or at least stop sharing my screen, and I'm hoping that I can just see all of you and we can have a conversation of kind of where you think this leaves us. So last week we talked and decided to stay at 35%. And now in this conversation right now, it seems like people are kind of leaning more toward changing, based on the comments and all this discussion that we've had, changing the way that we do this from a multiplication component part to the to the addition. Does that make sense to everyone?
Yes.
I'd like to hear verbal yeses or nos. So just for each place, Alana, I'm going to ask you to go through the rooms and ask whether add versus multiply is where you're at. This isn't a vote, it's just a temperature check understanding.
Okay, I guess we can start here in Albany, or start in Albany. Are we, I
mean, I guess what I would say, I think, Alex, you've done a great job of sort of summarizing the differences, and I would defer to the experts who are in communities to sort of dictate the direction we go. I think either approach is valid. I don't think either is going to be perfect. So I think relying on community experts, from my opinion, makes the most sense. I'm happy to go with whatever direction those members who are in communities feel we should go.
I'll go next. I am starting to lean a bit more towards add, but I agree with Neil. I'm going to yield to the community advocates and experts on this and go where you go, but I am starting to consider the addition versus the multiplication.
Yeah, so, just thinking about this and just through this conversation, the fact that the addition kind of approach seems to better reflect what, folks are kind of reflecting on in terms of, tracks that should be included. I think I'm there in terms of, the addition approach.
Thanks. We're going to go to Green Bay now. Elizabeth?
Elizabeth for labor. I'm also deferring to the activists and the folks on the other members. I also want to just point out that, and this is more to the in the future when we look at these again and all that, about the infrastructure projects. New York, at least what I'm aware of in the city, there are lots of projects that are at different levels of being implemented. So when we update it, we can also see what's happening. Are they working on that part of Queens? Are they working to create those infrastructure projects? Because I know it's been a headache down here. So, but that's the conversation for the future and updating. But like I said, I yield to slightly for addition, but I yield to the community members.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, the addition seems fine for me. I am still really curious to see what happens if we weigh the population and health characteristics at 2 or whatever the right number is, and see what happens there. But it doesn't seem like the adding versus multiplying is making too much of a critical difference.
I'm going to stay in New York City. Elizabeth?
Okay, yeah, I think I will go with the ad as well, just because it appeared that it covered a lot more families and people living closer to the burdens. So, yeah.
Eddie?
Sorry, I didn't know we've had to put cameras on. I'm also just trying to get past hearing government say they're going to defer to the activists. This is being taped, right? I just want to make sure for posterity. Oh, sorry,
Yes,
Skip.
it is. We are being recorded.
Yeah. So that was great to hear, guys. Yeah, I'm going to follow our member, and I think addition. It seems to have made a difference for a number of folks. So I'm going to trust that judgment and vote with the addition.
Go to Jill in Braybrook.
Can you hear me? I can't unmute. Okay. I'm feeling torn about this. I understand everybody's perspective, and I respect that we've looked at a few very specific areas where we've heard anecdotal information, and obviously you have a lot of institutional knowledge. And obviously I have a rural perspective and represent the North Country, which is one of the only regions that will be losing disadvantaged communities. But I'm a little concerned that this is a really big decision to be making at this point, given that if we do go with the addition, we also have to decide what we're going to weight differently. And that seems like it's more work than we have time to make that decision before next meeting. I'm also concerned that we didn't look at the Finger Lakes. We don't really have representation from the Mid-Hudson to weigh in on whether or not addition versus multiplying makes a really big impact in those communities that are left out. So I'm not really opposed. I just feel like I don't have a full picture of the impacts and whether or not, like if we decide to go with addition versus multiplication, we are stuck with addition and we cannot revert back to multiplication. So I guess I'm not sold. It's not a no for me, but I feel like I don't have enough information here. And I would also like to take a look at the North Country on the map if we have time to do that. Thanks.
Thanks, Jill.
We'll definitely make time for that. You lose one census tract, so I think it's important for you to be able to see it. So before we end today, we'll look at that. Sorry, Lana, go ahead.
It's okay. Thanks, Alex. Abby.
Thanks. You know, recognizing that neither approach is going to be perfect. I do think the blue boxes, the addition just kind of tweaks just that much to make it a little bit better. So that's the approach I prefer.
And Rawa.
Hey, everybody. Agree with really all of the sentiments shared so far. And I'm personally also leaning towards the addition.
And I will say that we are, our Finger Lakes, we do not have a representative from the Mid-Hudson. We also don't have a representative from Long Island or the Southern Tier. We do have representatives on the Climate Justice Working Group from the Finger Lakes region, but they are not, or the Capital Region as well, but they are not with us on this call. So we will reach out to them and try to get their position on this and get them to the meeting next time. Alex?
Yeah, so I mean, this is a departure, and I think if the goal is to vote next week and feel very confident in that vote, that is, you know, going to be a change that is there. One recommendation I could make is that if you wanted to make a small change now and just do with addition, but not reweight things strongly, then that could be done. And then we can investigate and look at that for future years. I think that those are all on the table, and these are small changes. Remember, there's 1,500 DACs that would be the same across the multiplication and the addition, right? It's just those smaller places. It is hard though. Like there's no stopping saying that hard. Like it's hard to try to make these types of decisions. So let me share this. We'll go back up here. Let's look at the North Country. So one thing, when I was looking at this in preparation for it, you gain 1 DAC. Let me just collapse this, see if I can, oh, wait, no, it's not gonna let me do it. Okay, and I go down here. In making this flexible, I've also taken the like visual map capital, like ability to see as much. So I guess we'll deal with that. Okay, over here. So you're losing this census tract, which has a burden percentile of 63% and vulnerability of 48%. 7,000 people live in that one. You're gaining this one, 5,000 people live here. Vulnerability percentile 72. 50% of the population in the census tract are less than 80% AMI. Let's just come back here and say, okay, this is 30% less than 80%. And then up here, you'd also lose this one. This is a burden percentile of 72%, 44th percentile for vulnerability. 5,600 people live here, 42% less than 80% AMI. Any thoughts on this?
You unmute me.
Sorry, I just unmuted you. I forgot I
Thank
had
you.
to do that.
That's okay. This is really helpful, and I'm glad we did this. The one census tract that is added is Fort Covington, which is adjacent to Akwesasne, which is the tribal nation in the North Country. And there's also a utility scale solar array that's going to be built there. So that's extremely significant, and I think changes my previous statement. So I think I'm leaning towards the addition approach rather than multiplication. So thank you.
Yeah. So I think, Alana, next steps is that we need to understand the advocates that are in other regions, have them look at this, and I'll work with you to share the map. I do want to look at Long Island really quick. And then we can kind of have a conversation next week about this, but it would seem that this is where you all want to go now. So that is, okay, Long Island's very long, so there's a lot here. There's some losses around the Valley Stream Village in Nassau County. Quite a lot of additions, though, in certain areas. So there's actually a 2% of census tract additions in Long Island, generally speaking. But you're going to lose some of these probably very high flood risk regions, even if they're but low vulnerability. So these are median income 90,000, 29% less than 80% AMI. But the addition here is 49% less than AMI, less than 80% AMI. Then generally speaking, let's look, no matter what West Hampton Beach area is in, and this is, I think, just really high flooding area that kind of trumps everything else in a lot of areas. And here we've got an addition with a higher vulnerability percentile. Another one over here. So I like to be able to look at you when I'm kind of trying to make this conversational part. I can show you all the statistics and all the maps, and I have. I'm going to put forth the idea that if you're going to make one big change, the addition versus multiplication is probably it. That trying to rework different weights, which I can explore right now and have it ready to explore, that might be a lot if you want to vote next week. But if you think it's important, and again, this is driven by you all, if you think it's important, then it's okay to take more weeks to investigate and discuss and talk through these different scenarios if you want to explore weighting different factors more or less. So I'm going to be quiet and see what you all think about that idea.
Yeah, Alex, just to that, this is Sonal. I think, you know, like I said, I would like to see the weighting of the health characteristics and the population characteristics, maybe just as a whole, and see what happens there. That's important to me personally before feeling comfortable with a vote.
That sounds good. Eddie, I saw your hand up as well.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I'm clear in what we're being asked to consider now. How many indicators total are we? Because I just see this being as a slippery slope to nowhere. Like if we start, well, that's my first question. How many indicators total comprise the different scores?
Yeah, 45 indicators.
So
And then you've got,
if I'm hearing that we're going to start that part of the possibility is starting to think of indicators 1 through 6 versus 17 through 23. I can't I don't I if that's where we're going, I would caution us not to do that.
I was going to caution against that too, Eddie, just so
Yeah.
you know that we don't want to go there. I think reweighting factors is something that you could consider and look at, but starting to go into indicator level weighting can be a real headache, and we're getting to like infinite number like ways of going through things, and at that point you're going to lose your ability to see the differences. Eddie, please keep going. I just wanted to say that I totally agree with you on that one. We don't want to go.
I guess what will be really helpful, Alex, is if you could help us avoid that outcome. Like if we could talk through about what different weighting might end up looking like. But I'm just trying to avoid us going down that rabbit hole. Like, and I also want to, I don't want to be dismissive of what Sonal said. Like we should look at, but once we start doing that, I'm just seeing a slippery slope that I'm trying to as for us as a working group to avoid. So I don't know how to respond to that, but the more guidance you could give us to avoid the rabbit hole, the more I'd appreciate it. Thanks, Alex.
Yeah. So let me put it this way. I think that, you know, what we could do is not all of these indicators down here. I don't think we should change the weighting of each individual one. But I think what we could do is say, okay, well, we could look at the weighting differences between, say, these three factors within the environmental one, or here's the health impacts one. So to Sonal's point, what I was going to do was for us to increase the weight of this one and see what happens. And so that's what we'll go. We don't want to go into saying, well, we want to weight low birth weight higher than the rest of them, because I think that could be a pathway to us going slightly crazy. So let's do it. Let's go there. If I change this to 2, now with the addition, it will let us see what happens, what changes. And so what I'm immediately looking for is if there's a change here with 35%, 35%, it doesn't look like it. So we've got an apples to apples comparison. And then I'm looking at differences across the proportions designated. With health increased, there's more loss in New York City. There's more loss in the Mid-Hudson. Western New York has an increase, slight increase in the Finger Lakes. Central New York loses. Long Island gains about the same as last time. Capital Region gains. Southern Tier gains. Mohawk Valley gains. North Country gains 1. So I'm curious to see how much gets lost, considering we know how much health impacts New York City. So let's take a look there. Oh, come on, work with me here. Okay. So now that I know southeastern Queens here looks like it's about the same as before with the addition subtraction. Where we're losing is when you go up to kind of northwestern Queens area, there's a lot that gets dropped if you increase the weighting. Over here.
Sorry,
end up
Alex, this is Abby. Can I ask a quick question?
Absolutely.
So just clarify for me real quick, the blue versus the yellow now, is the addition multiplication still in there or that's gone?
No, it's there.
It is.
If we're going to keep it, we're going to keep it. So the second scenario is addition, and now we've weighted to health.
Is it possible to see the
Yeah.
addition, one with the health changed, one without the health changed?
Yep. If we're all feeling like addition is the way we're going to go, then let me make that the thing over here. Can I just give a shout out to my team to be able to actually have built this thing with such flexibility? I just gotta say.
Huge shout outs. I hope the state is listening and will send goodies their way.
Okay, let me see if I can. Why can't I change that? Okay, like type in.
Is the Luma doc?
We are definitely not. We have a lot of privilege. Okay, so if I take this, I'm just reworking these to make it so that they match what I need so that we can get the same proportions across the two. So I'm looking to get 35% again for everything. And then we'll have a more apples to apples comparison. Okay, so I want to make this clear now. Scenario 1 has addition. That means that it's no longer just the draft criteria that we have. It is now different. Oh, wait, typo here. Scenario 2 has health weighted at 2. No. Oh, God. Oh, sorry. I thought I crashed the whole thing. Okay, I'm trying to slowly get us back to where we need to be. Okay, now we can see the distinction here. So there's 1% loss in New York State, 2 Mid-Hudson, gain in Western, gain in Finger Lakes, same in Long Island, loss in Central, gain in the Capital Region, gain in the Mohawk Valley, gain in Southern Tier, and gain in the North Country. And we're looking at the statistics here. They are S2, with the increased health, loses 1 percentage point for Latinos. Asians, same. The breakout for the thresholds, the averages are the same. But again, the devil's in the details here. So Sunset Park ends up loses 1, 2, 3, 4 different, 5 if you can hear, different areas. And then I would say this part of Queens is losing quite a bit as well. There's a little bit more gaining over here in southeastern Queens. So this is what it looks like. Sonal, is there any place you want me to zoom into?
I believe Sonal left. She had to catch a flight.
Oh, bummer. Okay. Well, let me go. We still have, I want to say, a couple more minutes where we can tinker with this, and then I want us to look at and make some decisions. So I'm going to go to Rochester, then to Buffalo, and then the North Country, and then Mid-Hudson. Okay, Rochester first. Looks like you lose 2 places in Rochester if we increase the health factor. And this one right here. Abby, I don't know if those feel good or bad to have lost or not.
Can you zoom in just a little bit? I think I know where that is, but.
You mean these giant census tracts? Like, nah, of course. Okay, so Clinton Crossings.
Yes. The heck is Clinton Crossings? Oh, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't be. It's funny because there's a big healthcare facility right there. So I don't. Does that even make? Is that like? Anyway, to me, that's. I don't have strong feelings.
Okay. And then there's this one right here.
I can't tell what it is.
Yeah, it's let's see here. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit more so you can see what it is. We're going to Pearl Megs.
And that's a loss. I guess that neighborhood I would be more concerned about for sure than the other one. So all right, just make sure I got this right. Yellow is what we're losing.
Yep.
All right. This neighborhood I would be more concerned about losing.
Yeah. I think what's interesting when I'm looking at this right now is that we're losing places where we actually think somehow things actually matter. So I was surprised to see Sunset Park with sweatshops lose some, and I'm surprised to see, some areas that really could use it lose some. So in here, Rawa, we've got a gain of 1, Buffalo City, pretty high vulnerability, and then a loss over here at Chickasaw CDP, and then a loss over here at Western Seneca.
Yeah, the weird thing is, I don't know what you just did to weight in this health thing. That gain is not great to me, but the losses are, I think, pretty significant.
Yeah, and I feel like that's actually true of most of the places we're looking at. Let's look at North Country next.
Alex, can I ask a question? It looks to me on the side there like we're gaining rural communities, losing, and now it's super small again. Was that right?
Yeah, so if you look at just the map kind of like in a blurry sense, you can see that there's more blue than yellow. So there's a lot more gain in rural areas if you're increasing the health factor. And then the losses, I think, are in more urban areas. And, like, I think at this point, like, if we're starting to look at weighting like this, like, I'm not sure that this is something that, frankly, we can even make judgment calls on, or at least that's what it feels like, just hearing you guys talk. I want to look at North Country real fast. Let me zoom out a little bit.
And Region 5, I unmuted you if you need to speak. You're ready to go.
Thank you. It looks like the census tract that was removed previously, they're both added back in, as well as the addition from before.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
So I think that, it's kind of, this one is now kind of the foundation. I think if you all agree with addition, then we can kind of work through that and I'll set it up for the vote for that next week. I'm not convinced about the health stuff though. Okay, we're gonna look at Mid-Hudson next. See what we can see. Okay, so there'd be some losses here. Tivoli Village. And another ones, but I can't really speak to why. They pretty high burden percentile. And there'd be a gain here. I mean, it seems very similar. I think what's happening is that we're working around the edges. So it's like there's really, this happens sometimes mathematically speaking, where what we're working on here are things where there's just, a slight change in one indicator. If you weight it one way, you're just going to bump up a little bit, a couple different ones, even though they're like so similar. You'd end up, I don't know, even though they're so similar in scores, you're still going to lose or gain in areas, and it feels almost random in some senses. And this is just how math works when you're rank ordering different scores and putting them together. But to me, just judging by what you guys have said, does this feel good or bad, or would you like the health at 2 or keep it at 1?
I heard Jill had her hand up. I've unmuted Region 5.
Thank you. This is killing me today. Is one of the indicators within health proximity to hospitals?
Let me check and make sure I'm accurate on this one. So health right here, proximity to hospitals, I think is in a different one.
Okay. I'm just curious if that's why it's increasing the number in rural communities and decreasing urbanized areas.
Yeah, those
The
should
other-
all be.
The other thing is and this is like getting way into the data, but if those health indicators are where the healthcare center was or where the person lives, and I don't know if we know that. Do we know that?
I should be able to answer that. I think it might depend on the different ones. So these are ED visits, so that's where they are.
Neil can answer that question.
Alex, those are all the cases represented in those data were based on address of residence at the time.
Okay.
Yeah. The thing that, the other thing that would be interesting, if we did decide to weight health higher, I'd be interested to look at the counts in those rural areas. We tend, one of the difficulties looking at small area data, in particular rural areas, that we are frequently, that the counts are small, so that the rates may be more unstable.
Mhm.
That's not to discount those at all. I just, we're like the,
so they might have a lot more error to them in the sense of this. They're not really as consistently indicative of higher health vulnerabilities is what you're talking about.
Right.
Like they could be, but we don't really know.
Right.
That makes sense to me.
I think Eddie had his hand up.
Hi, thanks. I think that the problem that I'm having with shifting the health, it's not just that one. If we would do this with some of the others, some of us may have similar misgivings. And I think that the problem is, I think you just touched on it, Alex, is that, we need to be mindful of what it is we're trying to accomplish here, right? We wanted to accomplish identifying communities that are disproportionately vulnerable to climate change risks, which, an extension of that obviously is environmental burdens. And so when we lift up stuff like an indicator like health, we start slightly de-emphasizing some of those other considerations. And as a couple of folks just pointed out, we're not exactly sure what health access we're bumping up with this, right? It could very well be not what we think it is, right? And you know what, like I think that the more we start messing with the individual adding points with specific indicators or whatever, the more it's going to be more of this stuff. I think I've always thought for a while now that the Climate Justice Working Group could use a really good DJ on it, right? Because we are now at the soundboard and we're mixing the treble and the bass. And I think that after a while, you're overdoing it. So this is my long-winded way of saying I think I'd feel more comfortable with where we were in terms of having these more or less equal weight than trying to bump up some, because I think there's unintended consequences on the horizon.
Yeah.
Abby,
So really just echoing basically what Eddie just said, of those, the 4 buckets you have there, they all are important. And so the idea of bumping health up, especially because looking at the maps, it doesn't like clearly give us something that we've been like trying to accomplish. I don't feel comfortable with it. And I think going back to what we were talking about last meeting, we are at the point, in my opinion, where we need to make a decision, implement this thing, see how it works, and then come back and tweak it based on how it actually plays out in real time.
Yeah, I would agree. Okay, can I ask that we stop sharing all the things? I just want to see you all and have this conversation. We've got 12 minutes left. And the whole point of next week is to try, if you all still want to vote. So I want to get a sense of, we've gone through several different parts here. And it all looks like we're going to end up voting on a final criteria that has an addition of the components rather than a multiplication. So I'll have that set up for you next week. Are there any other scenarios you want me to set up for you so that you can look at them, compare and contrast, or discuss? Or do you all feel like, no, we got to just do this, let's do it, let's go? Where are you at?
We want to go room by room, picture by picture again?
I was just going to let uncomfortable silence bring it up.
Comfortable silence it is?
I see people commenting in the chat. Region 5, I just wanted to unmute you since you don't have the option, and just make sure you had the opportunity to speak if you wanted to.
Thank you. I just wanted to echo Eddie's sentiments and Abby's sentiments about overcomplicating by playing with the weight at this point in the game. And I think we just need to vote on this thing next week. So I'm satisfied with the addition methodology, and I think we should move forward. Thanks.
Okay. I'm seeing lots of pluses, and you all are circumnavigating my whole like uncomfortable silence, not talking. Not fair, but we're making it work. Okay, so I think I would like to I think what I would like to do is talk to Sonal and make sure that she gets a chance to see the maps that I just showed you with the health factors, so that she is aware. And so I'll do that before our next meeting. But I will present the group with what you all just saw, with the kind of the one substantive change that we have made from the draft criteria to this one is the change of addition versus multiplication. There are no other changes, but I also want to make note that this is really important, that we are going to have an annual review process where we will be able to talk through these different components, and also that we are in, I think, at least another month, we'll be able to get diabetes data and start looking at that. We don't have it ready for the vote, but it's going to be there soon. So I just want you guys to know that we're not forgetting those different pieces that we already talked about based on the comments. Okay, with 9 minutes left.
Especially since Kim Kardashian and company keep taking our Ozempic, I'm grateful.
Always happy.
Yes, thank you. Just saying.
So yes, we will all be ready coming forth to next week with this, and I feel like you guys are all ready. Are there any other concerns or thoughts that you want me to be thinking about in preparation for next week's vote? Okay. I would like to ask to make sure that we have a quorum next week. That will be important. So that was, good. Cool.
That's what I was going to mention, Alex, in my closing, that, we need folks in physical locations, because for being in physical locations helps the climate justice working group members who can't get to physical locations because of being busy, because it doesn't work out for them because of physical limitations. So if you can get there, please get there. And I will be making that plea to the folks who are not with us today, that they need to make the effort to be here, because it's very important. We were all present for the draft vote. We all need to be present for the final vote. So just pointing that out, but yes, physical forum.
Rawa, I see your hand up.
Oh, thank you so much for that, Alana. I just want to clarify, am I able to call in on WebEx, or I have to be physically in the building?
We need to have a physical quorum of 7 to do business. So we can't vote unless there are 7 climate justice working group members physically in locations that are accessible to the public. under open meetings law. So once we have that 7, we can then have folks participate via video conference. But unless that 7 is present, we can't deliberate, we cannot vote.
Ooh, because I'm traveling next week. It's winter break at school, but yeah, let me know, please.
Eddie?
Quick question. So if I heard right, you said you need at least 7 people physically present, but aren't agency folks also climate justice working group members? Like if you have 7 government members of the climate justice working group in a conference room, doesn't that satisfy quorum?
So we have to have 4. So since there are 4 members that are state, all 4 of us, and then we just need 3 other members from the working group from the advocate side to be in physical locations. So obviously, you know, in an ideal setting, you know, everyone would be able to get to a physical location under open meetings law, of course. But you know, we need 3.
So I think we'll just need to make sure that that's coordinated across you all for those 3 that need to be in physical locations. But I'm really excited we're getting there. And I really appreciate you guys going with me in this crazy, let's add, let's multiply, let's wait, let's look at the crazy. So thank you. I think it really needed to be done to like really put forth the comments that were given. So, okay, we'll see you next week.
Oh, before we go, I just wanted to just sort of jump in quickly. Yes. So we are voting next week, the 23rd. I'm ready. It's I'll bring the champagne. But that doesn't mean, but we still will look to we still need to have a conversation about what our work looks like moving forward and what our future meetings and how we're going to coordinate to review information and review data. So I am looking to have not 6 meetings, you know, a year or anything like that. Maybe not even quarterly meetings, but I saw that one, Eddie. The law says at least 1. That's the minimum. I do want to have at least 1 or 2 meetings to go over that, so we know that we're clear in what we want to see from the future and how we want to review this data, and we're knowledgeable about the data sets and when they're updated and what's basically realistic for the working group to do based on when data sets become available and information becomes available. So we can definitely talk about that. Obviously, we'll sort of, I think that's going to be one of the aspects that we vote on. Alex, correct me if I'm wrong.
I think just the knowledge that we are going to, so for next week, we can vote on the draft criteria and also the fact that we will re-up. But then after that vote, I think we should work together to, you know, come forth with a plan and give it to the working group to say, here is what we think is a good plan to refresh the data, to re-up, to look at it, to evaluate it, all the things, and then get your thoughts on that plan.
Region 5, I saw you. I don't know if you were waving or if you had something to say. So I'm just gonna unmute you 1 more second.
Thank you for including me. I thought we were leaving. I was just saying bye. But thank you.
Okay.
Thanks,
Well,
everybody.
I knew we were leaving. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank
See
you all.
next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.